Republicans have been quick to chide the impeachment process to avoid discussing whether it's appropriate for President Trump to solicit a foreign government to investigate his political opponent. But now that the impeachment inquiry is about to become public, Republicans are forced to confront the substance of the case against Donald Trump, questions they've been dodging by any means necessary.
Was it appropriate for the president to ask for investigations of his Democratic rivals with another foreign leader?
I've never seen one talking point from a White House. I'm talking to you based upon the most important facts we have.
You have no problem with any of this?
I have zero problems with this phone call.
Even with that sequencing?
I just told you.
Do you wish that conversation would have never happened, sir?
Well, I wish they wouldn't have released the transcript of a conversation.
Did the president have to mention Joe Biden? Boy, that's the elephant in the room. I don't think you necessarily had to, but I did not see it as a quid pro quo.
Would you ask a foreign country to investigate?
I'm not the president of the United States.
But it's okay for our president to exhort other countries to
investigate. Okay, we're going to move on to another question, but what I would say is we can't determine that yet.
Do you think it's okay for President Trump to ask China to launch an investigation of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden?
I don't know if that's a real request or him just needling the press.
The question is it appropriate for a president
Look, I think we are going to have an investigation.
Why don't you want to answer the question about is it okay for the president to ask a foreign country to investigate the Biden?
Why do an interview instead of interviewing yourself?
What do you make of these allegations?
I said I'm not going to comment on the merits of what's going forward.
Is that concerning at all to you that the transcript has been described as a perfect transcript but may not have been?
No, I mean, there's a process. The changes I think that were outlined in the press were not a big deal.
Republicans are so desperate not to answer questions about Trump's behavior that veteran Congressman Don Young from Alaska headbutted a camera when confronted by the liberal group MoveOn.org before ducking into an elevator.
Congressman, it's a simple yes or no question. The best way to do these things is we talk to our press secretary.
There you go.
Is it an acceptable thing to ask foreign governments to interfere in our elections?
Just asking the same question over and over again is not going to get you guys anywhere. Yeah. But if you talk to Zach in our office, he's our press secretary. He's the best person to talk to about this, and we'll be able to get you something back.
Just curious, the yes or no question. Do you think it's okay for the president to pressure foreign governments to interfere in our elections?
I think the best thing to do is talk to our press secretary, guys.
You ever in a situation like that where you just, like, why is the elevator not coming? I really need to get on this elevator. We called Zach. We called Zach in the congressman's press office to get an answer. Guess what? No response. The next public phase of impeachment could take its toll on Republicans, as Jennifer Rubin notes in the Washington Post, quote, if Republicans ever break free of their irrational fear of Trump and his base, they might recognize that saving him is becoming incompatible with saving themselves. Joining us now, Jennifer Rubin, opinion writer at the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. E.J. Dionne, opinion writer for the Washington Post and visiting professor at Harvard University. I kind of felt for Congressman Young there for a second as he was trying to get in that elevator and escape the repeated asking of the question. But Jennifer, it's kind of crazy, right? Republican after Republican after Republican. Nobody wants to discuss the merits. Nobody wants to comment on the merits, or they have no problem with the phone call. At some point, the process argument disappears because the process will become transparent to everybody. And that whole argument about how it's Soviet-style depositions will evaporate.
Well, I guess now Zach is the congressman from Alaska, because apparently he can answer questions that the congressmen don't. I find this really sort of embarrassing and pathetic. These people are paid to at least give us their opinion. They can have whatever view they want, but to be afraid of saying what they think or to run literally from the press or their own constituents, this is not a sustainable strategy, let me tell you. And judging from the poll numbers for people like Cory Gardner and Joni Ernst, it's not going to sustain them. I think they're trapped. The process argument has fallen apart, as you say, and they don't have a good substantive argument. The president's defense is, I did it, and it doesn't matter. I don't care. Everything I do is fine. The Article 2 of the Constitution allows me to do whatever the heck I want. So I don't know how senators in particular, who I think have a higher level of probity, are going to deal with this. Essentially, we have a confession. We're now going to have to exonerate them. That's apparently what the Senate is contemplating, that even with a quid pro quo, hey, whatever.
Well, EJ, this is interesting because Lindsey Graham was on there saying he had no problem with the phone call. There were a couple of people there who don't really take any issue with it, but there were a lot of them who were saying difficult question, unfair question, stop interviewing yourself. We'll get to the investigation. We'll get to the merits of it. At some point, and that point may come within 2 weeks, it may come within 30 days, there will be nothing to hide behind, and there will just be the facts, which, by the way, most of us have known largely since day one. What happens then?
Well, I think they're in a heap of trouble, but they're already in a heap of trouble. I mean, we have reached a pretty bad point when Don Young's headbutt may have been the most honest response in that whole lot of evasions. I was thinking about that old Police song when I saw that that series of word salads, you know, to do, to da. That's all I have to say to you. They have nothing to say because they know that they are being asked to defend the indefensible. And it is particularly hard for senators in tough races next year from tough states, Joni Ernst and Susan Collins and Cory Gardner, because they lose either way. They need the Trump base, and they know they need a lot of votes from anti-Trump people. So what you're starting to see, there's a story in the Post, they're going to try to pivot to say, well, yeah, this is what he said, but it's not impeachable or it's not illegal. But this is a complete contradiction to so many of the things they've said in the past. During the Russia investigation, they were denying, they were saying, yes, foreign interference would be wrong, but Trump is innocent. They can't say he's innocent now because the evidence is too overwhelming, and that's why they just don't know what to say.
And we're seeing a crack amongst conservatives, Jennifer, in this. The support amongst Republicans for Donald Trump is now down to about 74% in this particular instance. Chris Wallace yesterday on Fox saying that it was more than just a phone call or a perfect phone call, whatever it is. Judge Andrew Napolitano wrote an op-ed in which he weighs in on this. I want to read you from that. It says, with the process soon to be as Republicans have demanded, and with the proof of impeachable offenses plain to see, to what will the president's allies resort as a defense? They will claim that the federal crimes of soliciting campaign assistance from foreign governments and bribery aren't impeachable offenses, and that Trump was misunderstood because he exaggerates all the time and often doesn't mean what he says. And then the American public will decide if this, all this is skim milk or cream. And that's what it comes down to. We're not, unlike the Mueller report, we're not going to be, I imagine, I'm guessing, we're not going to be having arguments of fact come 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now.
This is what the Republicans are reduced to arguing, that bribery is not an impeachable offense. This is pretty crazy stuff. And I think EJ is exactly right that for senators who don't live in the middle of deep, deep red America and are not soaking day after day in Fox News, these arguments are going to come across as pretty crackpotish. And think about this. Does the Republican Party really want to go down in history as the pro-corruption party? This is essentially what Trump is saying. I can get foreigners to decide our elections. I can use taxpayer-funded aid to Ukraine, which is defending itself against what's supposed to be a common enemy, Russia, and instead get them to use their influence to help me win an election. This is the very essence of corruption, and I don't see how it's going to be sustainable for them to keep supporting it and defending it.
Thanks to both of you, Jen Rubin and EJ Dionne. Always appreciate your analysis.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.